Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Retrospective by Headless where we have, or actually, where we review a real world Headless project with the actual team that implemented that project. I'm Marcelo Lewin, Headless Creator. As always, get a hold of me, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. In today's episode, I'm speaking with the team from the agency Matter Supply. They're actually back. And they worked this time on another cool project through called Nike DNA, which is the Department of Nike Archives. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get them on. Everybody, there you go. Hey, welcome everybody. How are you guys?
We are good. Thank you for
Hello.
asking.
Glad to have you all here. We've got David, also known as Fone, right? Mark and Natalia, and we're going to let you guys introduce yourself. So, David, why don't we start with you?
Cool. So my name is David, as Marcelo said. I'm the director of technology at Matter Supply. I worked at the Nike DNA team for. I've been working on that project for at least 1 year now, maybe a little bit more. But we've been working with Nike more than that. So yeah.
All right, Natalia, you're up.
Hey, thank you, Marcela. Hi, I'm Natalia Cardona. I'm a lead designer and art director here at Mara Supply. I have been working here for around 4 years, I think so. I'm originally from Colombia as well as Fone, but I'm currently living in Vancouver, Canada.
That's right. I want to mention this is a worldwide presenter team because Fone, you are in Colombia, right?
Yes, I'm originally from Medellin. I usually work in Medellin. Right now I'm visiting family, so I'm up in the mountains. I'm close to a town called Cali.
Awesome. We have different time zones here. And Mark, you're up, and you are in Oregon. So,
I am, yeah. Good morning. Yeah, I'm Mark. I'm one of the founders and the principal at Matter Supply. I've been on the Nike project since the inception and kind of stepped back a little bit to have Natalia and Fone lead the project for over a year now. And Natalia has actually just celebrated her 4 year anniversary. It wasn't just about 4 years. She literally has just celebrated her 4 year anniversary.
well, congratulations, Natalia.
Thank you.
So, Mark, real quick, you mentioned Matter Supply. I mean, people watched the other episode where you talked about it, so be a little brief on it, but tell us a little bit about Matter Supply.
Do you just tell me to just like do the one liner, the elevator
The
pitch?
elevator pitch. Imagine an elevator. You got 30 seconds. Go.
Okay. Oh my. Meta Supply is a digital creative agency. Focus a lot on really complex technology and solution implementations, but also really on human-centric design. So we're a full circle agency, if you will, going end to end on all sorts of digital products. Right now, focusing a little bit more on heritage brands and historic storytelling. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, that's kind of the spiel. We've been around for 6 years. Just celebrated our 6 year anniversary actually as well.
That was good. I reached my top floor in the building, so the elevator pitch worked.
Yeah, of course, you're
Perfect.
top floor. How's the carpet up there?
No, I'm the cleaning crew up at that
Oh,
floor.
that,
No.
that top floor, the shed.
That's where we keep the supplies. Anyway, all right, real quick, let's the Nike DNA project. This is a really cool project. Obviously, Nike. Everybody knows Nike. Tell us a little bit about that project. Whoever wants to jump in.
I can probably take the first stab at it.
Sure.
A DNA or Department of Nike Archives, which is a pretty amazing name for an archive team, is actually was actually born out of collecting all of the physical items that Nike has collected over the years, and kind of managing those, digitizing those. Right, they loan them out to designers and marketers to actually inspect of how did the shoe really look like in 1983, for example. Um, the department has around 250,000 items in its collection, um, and our job was essentially to make that accessible to everyone at Nike from a in a digital way. They had a previous solution that didn't quite get to that solution, but yeah, so that was our job on DNA.
So let's talk about the problem that existed prior to the solution to be implemented. What was the why did they come to you, and what was the exact problem they had?
Right. if you imagine managing 250,000 items is a bit of an ask. Right? They have a real physical location, basically a vault, if you will, with all of those items, and they all need to be managed somewhere in a system, and they all managed through museum management software, which is, if you are familiar with that feels like 2 generations back of like software that's like maybe 2 generations back, not even last gen. But managing a digital experience with that is a bit of an ask. And they basically came to us and asked us if we could create a very immersive digital experience that really helps designers and marketers find these products, learn about these products, learn about the stories, learn about the context of Nike, and really bring all of this information that the archivists and the historians and the storytellers have collected at Nike to everyone at Nike. And that wasn't the case up to that point, because the systems are kind of duct taped together and weren't really working, right? Certain things were breaking because they've reached end of life or they were out of support. And yeah, so why they came to us, we've been working with Nike for quite a while, basically almost since the beginning of Matter Supply. And what we've always done is making sure that we integrate with Nike systems. So we, from the very beginning, said we're not going to do what a lot of agencies do, which is, oh, we're going to put you on a platform somewhere else. We're going to make sure that all of what we do lives within your infrastructure. And we've gone that extra step because we wanted to make sure that when we're done, this experience lives on. And obviously, talked to a lot of people along the way and learned a lot. So when something really complex like this comes along, like we were one of the agencies they asked, and won the pitch at the end of the day. There's still a few agencies around, and it's always a bit competitive, which is good. Makes you feel good when you win it.
Yeah, definitely. So what was the tech stack before you guys started implementing the new version?
Yeah, it was AEM before it was AEM. So CQ5 was the main platform for all of the items, right? So they have they had a part of the site that was dedicated to all of the items and descriptions and pictures and all of that, where they put that up, and that was on CQ5. And then they had a part of the experience was on WordPress as well, to allow them
WordPress. Wow.
WordPress. Okay. Yeah. So, well, both, right? So they were literally mimicking each other, kind of as like a side-by-side experience, but kind of trying to not make it look like it was like a 2-platform experience. So you had to
was there a separate front end to manage it, or
a separate back end? Yeah. So
or like the front end to the back end, the admin.
Yeah, exactly. The separate admins, and you had to log in twice because it was different experience. Right? It's all internal. So none of this is public. But yeah, so the tech stack was that, and then the obviously the museum management software, which we haven't replaced. We actually just had it as a legacy system that we started to integrate, but that is built on Oracle and not a normalized database, right? And there was no API to actually access that information or anything like that. So that was the tech stack before.
I never thought there would be a museum management system, but it does make sense. I mean, there are certain needs and requirements for museums, right? And what they're doing is pretty much a museum, right? Pretty much, because it goes back, I don't know, 100 years, or I don't know how long back it goes back.
Yeah, 100 years ago, they don't have that many items. I don't think they have anything before 1930 something, but most of it starts during.
But about 90. I mean, that's quite a bit. Yeah. Definitely. All right, let's talk about the current infrastructure. So the tech stack. What did you guys do? Who'd like to take that?
I'm actually going to jump on that one. I'm going to say I do remember about WordPress. I do remember it now. Sometimes I forget we kind of replaced that one. Since they are managing content, we basically wanted to keep it that way a little bit, but we switched into, let's say, modern technology. We are doing GraphQL. I'm going to do the basics. Next.js for the front end, Our backend is on GraphQL. We have a middleware layer where we are integrating all of our subservices, and it's done in GraphQL mesh. So we are basically sticking together all the information, so the front end is the cleanest as possible. On the back end, we have a lot of things. We have Cloudinary managing the assets. We have Strapi, that's actually a really big one. That's the new CMS system we put in place. Strapi basically is handling all the stories and pages, basic content.
I'm assuming it's the self-hosted, or is it the cloud version?
The self-hosted.
It makes sense, right? Because they want to, from a security perspective, they're probably going to keep it all internal. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything is inside a VPC, so nothing is accessible on the outside except on the mesh. So that's actually pretty secure. And as I said, like VPC, we are using AWS as our cloud management, basically for all of that. And we actually did infrastructure as a code. Those the letters that stands, I'd never read them before until I did this. Infrastructure as a code, I was like, what is wait, I'm terrible at letters in English, but anyways, I was like, what is that? IAAC, something like that.
Yeah.
And then I learned that something like Terraform exists. So I think that's amazing.
Real quick, explain a little bit on infrastructure as a code for people to understand the power of this. Just real quick.
Yeah, I had to go on that direction actually because I never did something like that before. But basically, is being able to replicate your entire infrastructure anywhere, at anytime you want, because you have all the configurations, all the settings in a set of configuration files. I thought before it was a language, but it's actually a bunch of configuration files that uses pretty much a engine to build it up. So infrastructure as a code basically stands on you have all your resources described, and there is an engine that helps you out, like putting all of that up and managing or scaling up, scaling down, changing the configuration. Like anything you want, is just a matter of changing a configuration file and running a plan
Right.
And that one basically changes everything.
Right. And
so
the power is you can
learned,
version control this too. Changes.
Yeah, correct. So I know there is a bunch. I learned the Terraform way, but I know AWS has its own engine to do that. I think it's I always forget the name of that one.
CloudFormation.
CloudFormation, thank you. And every cloud actually has its own thing, from what I know. But the Terraform, in theory, is like multi-cloud. I say in theory because it's not really multi-cloud. You need to actually know how to do everything in all clouds and basically import the modules that help you out with your configuration. So yeah, that's a summary. It's not as complex as you think. It's actually just knowing a little bit about your infrastructure and how to describe it. But Terraform itself is like really simple. I think the complex piece is AWS.
Definitely AWS is complex. But we'll switch to the UX experience real quick. The before and after, Natalia. I'd love to hear where was it and what changes were done, big picture wise.
This was a 10 years old website, so it was a dramatic change that we have to do. Like it didn't have like a purpose. It was very complex to navigate and find things, and very few people were using it. And even though it was like the main source of truth and resources that DNA, the Nike has, very few people knew about the existence or just ignored it and didn't use it because of the complexity it had to find stuff in there. So rather than going in there and explore and find artifacts and information, they will prefer to write emails to the team, and so they were like loaded of work, like side work, to help people to give that information that they could be finding inside of the website. So what we did was try to put DNA in the center of whatever the users, the targets that we were pointing to were looking for. So rather than going to Google, or there were different sources that they pulling the information that they needed. We wanted to be DNA that source always, like for inspiration, for storytelling, narrative, marketing, like all that stuff that is surrounding DNA. So yeah, after a bunch of interviews, talking with the stakeholders, users, we realized what was going on, what were they like pain points, and that's how we continue going on with the project.
It seems like the big pain point was discovery of content, right? Content discovery seems, which in all honesty, I think that's a very big pain point for a lot of companies, is being able to discover content, because you have multiple, in your case, as you guys were describing, you have multiple systems. I'm assuming there was an issue with single source of truth, I would assume, since you had multiple systems. So
I think there's also the problem of actually working with information, right? Like if you think about these stories, they sound pretty short. They sound like a quick blog post, but they're legit an hour long to read through, right? So when you think about a story about the Air Force One being an hour long, that's not something that you just consume on a coffee break, right? Like that's something that you like really sit down and read almost like a book.
right.
And almost nobody does that in the digital world on a screen or on the phone even, right? Like we have audiobooks and all of that, or we read real books, but we really had to change the paradigm of how we consume content that's that long, and things like highlighting information and summarizing, right? We have a summary mode for all of these stories so that you can actually quickly at a glance go through the stories and find what you're looking for. So there was a lot of like finding is a big issue, finding where to dig in a story, but also
consuming
treating,
sounds like another issue.
consuming is a big issue, and then also reusing it, right? Like think about a marketer who is working on the Air Force One marketing campaign. They might read something that they are not going to use for another 2 years because it's just not relevant to the story yet, but they still can highlight it and say like, hey, like in their head, it's like, hey, this is for later. I'm going to take a note on this particular paragraph, on this particular line here, and make a note for later, just in case I need this.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm assuming you guys did this before this whole generative AI revolution that's taken place since the end of last year, but it sounds like this is prime candidate for the summarization and all that for that, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And asking questions, right? Like
Asking questions, in that 1 hour document that you may not have time. Give me the key points of this kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Let's talk about team description and the roles. What were the roles involved in your company, the roles involved in their company?
Yeah, I can take a first crack at this. From the role division, it was pretty much our team was doing the end-to-end design and technology of the experience, with stakeholders describing kind of the vision of what problems they have and where they come from. Stakeholders on Nike's side. So we have a lead project lead on Nike's side, our main point of contact. She's our better angel, always guiding us through all sorts of difficulties at Nike, but she's also, I think, the heart and soul at DNA, and like pushing the digital experience forward. And she knows like what it takes to really build something like this, and is always looking to improve the experience. And she's relentless when it comes to user experience and making sure it works for people at Nike, and really drives home the problem that we defined. On our side, we had a team of developers. We call them technologists. So if you hear that term, that's another word for developers. And a small team of designers, and a project manager, and QA, essentially.
What was the total number of people involved in this project?
We rotate cast so that they don't get burned out on a single project or get bored with a single project. I think at any given point we have about 6 people staffed on the project, so we're cycling it out. So you have like a team of like 3, 4 developers, 1 or 2 designers, 1 project manager, 1 or 2 QA.
But it sounded like he had one point of contact on Nike as opposed to multiple. Do you
Yes,
feel
absolutely.
that is a strength or a challenge to have one point of contact?
I wanted to jump. Sorry, Mark. I wanted to jump in that before you asked. I was about to say, like we had like one person as our point of contact, but if we needed more people, like she actually takes care of like bringing more
Right.
people in, and I think it was a strength the way we've been working with her all the way because it's not because she's our advocate. The fact that she really believes in the digital, like bringing the experience to a digital aspect. I think that plays in our favor. It was a really great strength to have her in like as a part of our team because without getting too advanced in the agenda, training was also super simple having her on board because it was the experience itself. We didn't bring it like big, but we actually like launched a small piece and then we built on top. So every time we needed to launch something, she has one like we meet with her once a week, and if we need more meetings, she takes care of that. And if she needs to bring more people in, as I said, she also takes care of that. So every time we launched something, there was already the crew that needed to see that piece, and they were trained immediately on that.
Yeah. She sounds like she was also an evangelist for this project, right? Not just a point of contact, but an evangelizing the new way of working within Nike for this particular project, I would assume.
Absolutely. And she's been with Nike for around 20 years. I want to say more than 20 years.
30.
And 30? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow.
She knows the ins and outs of Nike like nobody I have ever met at Nike. And it's, like I've done this job for a while now, and I've worked with a variety of stakeholders and point of contacts on client side. And sometimes it's like the person who started 6 months ago. And that is extremely difficult sometimes to really get access to anything, but she navigates everything like with the grace of a politician sometimes internally, right? But like sometimes also like so persuasive and just like getting things done, and she knows where everything is and where she can get access to everything. So it's this has been like an absolute dream in terms of like client like point of contact, because it's like she's the person anyway that you'd go to, like even if you have someone in between, like she'd be the person you go to ask. And so having direct access to someone who knows and can help you unlock and really unblock you every time that you need something done
it's
is
always
awesome.
good to have somebody like that. Yeah, definitely. So how were decisions made? Like for example, the tech stack to use, the UX experience, the final UX experience, the budget. Like who made those decisions? Was this like some of you guys, some of them? Was this a collaboration between both of them?
I think decisions were like we both made decisions in a way that we actually suggested the tech stack. They trusted our expertise and they continued trusting that. So we suggested the tech stack. For example, Strappy, that was a big thing. We suggested it. We were looking basically three criteria actually came in. One of them was the self-hosted experience, being able to do something like that. The other one was being able to customize the content author experience, because that it's our main client. It's funny how we have a website, but the actual CMS admin is as important as the website, because our client is the content author. So it's our most important user. So that was another criteria. And I think the other one was the tech stack affinity, because Strappy was also made with the technology we've been using. So when we, and obviously the GraphQL API, that tech stack affinity. So when we've been deciding stuff, we always like mention the any decision to them or any suggestion to them, even though they make the last decision, they kind of trust our expertise. There are always people that always ask you like why, but usually they don't ask. It's like, we trust you guys.
Well, and I'm sure that's because you guys have been working, as Mark said, for such a long time that they build that trust, right? I think that's an important thing in any project, is to have that trust with the customer. Sometimes it's hard because especially if it's the first project, it takes a while to get that trust going. But let's talk about communication and the method of communication you guys use internally within your team, and talk about what worked, what didn't, what tools you used, and then how did you also communicate with Nike itself, and what tools were you using, and what did work and didn't work? What was a challenge?
Mostly Slack, honestly. That was our preferred way of communicating for day-to-day stuff. We internally use Slack, but we also have a Slack Connect, whatever it's called, remote connection of 2 workspaces in Slack with Nike. So we have a few channels there that we communicate with. Right, where there's a technology team at Nike that we communicate with. There's other stakeholders from a narrative or storytelling perspective that we communicate with there. So depending on what the sprint is that we're currently working on, that's usually small questions are there. But we also have our normal, we have our own flavor of Agile, and we have our daily stand-ups and the weekly meeting with the client where we just go through the current backlog, essentially groom the backlog a little bit with her and prioritize the backlog and talk through any problems that are arising or risks that are arising. We have a risk tracker that we use that everybody has insight to basically all the time. But yeah, it's daily stand-ups, weekly client meeting, and the likes, and mostly Slack. Yeah.
Did you have any kinds of reports you provided on a monthly basis, or besides your stand-ups?
Weekly, actually.
Weekly.
Our project manager is not here today. She always does the Lord's work of going through all of the released features, right, and the timeline chart and everything, and be like, hey, here's where we're at, here's what's coming in the next few releases, here's what we released in the past, so that our stakeholders really have all the information they need if their boss ever walks in and is like, hey, what are you even doing? It's like,
right.
Here's everything we've been doing, and even between releases, right?
Were there any challenges? I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge challenge, but anything that you feel you've learned after you were done and improved on from a communications perspective?
I think exactly what Mark just said, the weekly communication and all of that. I think that was the learning. Like we, at the beginning, let's say, and that, I don't know if the challenge was not having the actual product live yet or something, but at the beginning there was a lot of uncertainty, sometimes silence and stuff. And just the weekly meeting was the point where all questions were asked, and those meetings were long. I think the weekly reports are the learning. The way our project manager describes, like not just the launch, but the features we've been working on, and the progress, and describing the backlog, and describing the timeline, and having the eyes always like on a timeline, on a time frame. I think that was key. I think the biggest learning, it's always communicating with the client, like having the shortest time span you could have, just to communicate as much as you can without also being super long and super confusing. So weekly was our cadence. That was the pace that worked for us. We've been also doing 1 week sprints, so shorten that time a little bit.
Yeah.
Helped very much on the communication piece. It's a challenge on the development side, but that's another thing I would say.
Were there a lot of change orders or things that weren't part of that scope that you felt you guys had to incorporate into your sprints?
No, not really. I mean, we from the beginning actually structured it so that it's like we kind of, whenever we take on projects, we think of our projects as almost like businesses, right? So we start them as flywheels, essentially, of like, what can we do today that really helps for the next step in the project. So we structured the project into a laid a foundation for a new ecosystem and built all of the artifacts on top. And the stories weren't even part of the first contract. We said that's going to be a second contract to integrate the stories, and like we've always layered on top. But it was very much like we didn't do the, oh yeah, we're going to sign a 3-year deal and then we're going to build all of this. It was very much like, hey, we're going to build this first step, and then we'll see if we all like each other after that. If we're having a good time, because we're not going to hold you hostage. And it's a bit of a crass word of saying we make sure that we can always hand this off to your internal team should you decide to do so. And that's the agency life, right? But then, yeah, it was just the next contract, and they get a little longer as you move along because the trust is established and there's a lot more to do, and everything that you start to like spin up with that flywheel starts to take hold, right? Like you kind of get into that groove.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that helps in building trust, right? By saying, hey, we want to build this so you take over and we can be out of the map forever. That automatically builds trust and in that relationship there. From a budget perspective, if you had more, would it be different? How you implemented it, your tech stack? If you had less, would it be different?
Absolutely. I think money is always a bit of a blocker, essentially, but also it provides a little bit of guardrails in terms of how far you actually take something. Because while we do have the approach of really focusing on one complex problem within each contract, we also know that there's a lot of other things that need to fit within that same contract, right? So I think the search is awesome the way we have it. For example, right? Like we implemented a very custom Elasticsearch based solution that has a UX experience that is pretty unique. Like I don't think we've ever seen it like this done, and people are loving it. But I think there's a lot more that could have been done to help people find and discover things that they might not expect. Right, that which was kind of like the idea. As you search, you should find things that you did not really expect before, so that you have these little branches that kind of like go that shoot off from you doing your work and that inspire you, right? That was the big ticket item, was inspiring people and really informing them. So there's that. From a front end perspective, there's a lot more. I think there's probably, I would say 60%, 70% of the ideas are collecting dust on the editing room floor at this point, or in Natalia's Figma file, right? So it's unfortunate. There's a lot of stuff in there that we'd really love to do, but Natalia and I both had, like, at different times had that thankless job of cutting features out to fit within the budget. The budget had been cut down. Tough. There were a few things that we could have still cut that make the experience really unique at this point, right? Like there's search, and then there is, just put a search on my website that finds something. So, right, like if the budget was half, like the search would have been nowhere near as robust as it is now, and all that.
Yeah. Sure. Natalia, from your perspective, if the budget was different, what would have changed on the UX experience? Whether you have more or less, what do you think? How would it have been affected?
Definitely, it wouldn't be what we have today. Like, even though we wish it was bigger, like the budget, we managed to bring a minimal, lovable product. Like, it is really enjoyable to use, and luckily, like now that it's launched for the internal employees in Nike, they have been like loving it and using it a lot, and it has been very well received, and that's very nice, like, to hear. And for the DNA team, it has created like a big impact. So that had helped to make some noise around DNA. Are trying to implement one of those features that we just are there, Dustin, but we are thinking about them, and we have managed in these new contracts to develop a few of them. So it's baby steps, and we are getting into what we hope we wanted. But if we have more, it will be like a huge opportunity to implement a big features that we wanted as that will impact way more on the timeline.
The discovery and yep,
yeah.
definitely. Cool. From a timeline perspective, I work with many companies that we have deadlines are set, and you always question like, why are these deadlines set? They seem to be pulled out of thin air, or somebody needs a promotion, so they need to make sure this is implemented. Now, of course, that didn't happen here, but how hard were these deadlines? Who set the deadlines? What were some of the reasons these deadlines were set? Were any deadlines missed? I know that's a lot, I'm packing a lot of questions there, but whoever would like to take, let's start with who set the deadlines and were they all met?
The deadline was set by the client during the pitch or during the RFP phase, because Nike had their 50th anniversary last year, right? So we really want to make sure that this experience was live, so that other agencies, and you if you go out and search for marketing campaigns and whatnot for Nike's 50th anniversary, you'll find a lot of information. And that was because we hauled ass, essentially. We made it so that like other agencies are able to essentially get that information that they needed to tell the stories that they want to, right? Be it like the Air Jordan story or whatever it may be for the 50th anniversary. And there's a bunch of experiences out there, and that really kind of drove the deadline. And I think as we started to imagining this project, we kind of also took the client along with us to be like, hey, let's think a little bit different about this whole problem space that we have, right? It wasn't just, can you create a website for these items? It was it was actually a really sharp problem statement that we created for it. And it wasn't so much missed as saying like, hey, we need to extend this timeline and launch in different phases than what they initially expected. So the timelines weren't like super hard deadlines, but we knew that certain things needed to launch earlier than others because we did want to make sure that other people can actually get access to the information that they needed as early as possible, and we're able to deprioritize all the things and deliver them later.
And I'm assuming the good communication we were talking about earlier, having that single point of contact and that person bringing in the right people at the right time, to me, that seems like that would help in meeting these deadlines.
Yeah, and I feel like Natalia and Fanny probably can talk like how it is nowadays, because deadlines, there's still deadlines today, right? Like for certain features that we deliver, and I think today it's even better like than back then. We're like back then it was a longer conversation to shift those deadlines, right? Because we essentially had just met and the trust was being established and all that. So it's got to make sure that you don't overpromise anything, because that's how you built that trust. Basically, be very open from the beginning of like, that's not going to work out. Like that deadline is not going to work out the way you wanted if we're building all of this. And it was a negotiation and a conversation, but it's important to be candid and to also then live up to the expectations, right?
Did you get to a point where in any of the deadlines that you were supposed to meet, where you knew you weren't going to meet them and that you communicate that very quickly? Or were they all met pretty much?
I'm going to take the bullet on this one.
Yeah.
There was a point on the story building, like that feature, when I'm going to guess we all had different understandings of what we were going to deliver and when. Like the big thing was always planned to be delivered, but the when, it was I think that was a piece we were still in conversations. So at the beginning, we were going to deliver a very simple UI experience on the website, I mean, and a more complex piece on the CMS. Like having the client on board on something like that, I think that was a real challenge because the client it's their product. They don't think in halfway experiences. They don't think in, oh, I'm going to build a grid on the CMS and on the UI. I'm not going to see it. What's going on there? Is it a bug? So explaining that it's not a bug, it's actually part of a plan and a process. That I think that was a really amazing challenge to have. I think that communication and the trust and having her on board, I think all of those items we mentioned before actually contributed, and we were able to. If that wasn't the case, it was impossible to deliver the CMS or the story pieces in the time frame that we have before. But the most important thing is not blocking people or blocking their work. So content authoring had to happen way before users were able to actually see the stories on the website. So that allows us to plan first the CMS piece and make it as complex as it should be, and then jumping on the UI and having the client understanding that it's actually part of, like, that's actually a not a bug.
Right. Yep. Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. Let's switch a little bit now to research and training. And how much did you guys have to learn on your end? And what were those learnings? Was it on the tech stack? Was it more on what DNA is? And then what kind of education and training did they have to do? And who was in charge of that?
Before Mark takes on this, because I know he was going to unmute himself maybe, I'm going to say all of the above. Like what we had to learn, tech stack, client-wise, the client business, and what the client had to learn, like also on the tech stack, and the technology they have implemented. Like I'm pretty sure we all had to learn a bunch on every single aspect. It's like we knew how to build complex products, but we didn't know about their business. As we learned, we realized that we had to put more things on what we were building. So that meant we learning and we training ourselves. And bringing somebody on the team wasn't simple at all, because the tech stack is really complex. And not just the tech stack. We can summarize the tech stack in a couple of technologies that everybody kind of are familiar with. But when you combine them all together, it's a monster product. So learning how the product works, it's super tough. I can witness that because on January last year, 2022, I was learning about the project. It was half of what it is right now, and it was already a monster project. I was like, what is going on everywhere? So yeah, it's tough. I think the way we are doing it right now is basically when somebody joins the team, it has like a person in charge. So onboarding, speed programming sessions, like all of that is part of the training. But I think my answer is all of the above. We had to do everything, learning everywhere.
What about retraining the customer? I don't know if that had to be done, but they have their way of doing things prior to this new system, right? And I don't mean retraining them into click here instead of clicking there. I'm talking about in the thought process of how things were done before and how things are done now, right? For example, if you take a client that was on a legacy CMS and now you put them on a headless CMS, it's a different paradigm, right? Of how you author, how you deliver. Did you have to do any of that with this current client?
We did. I'm going to let Natalia talk a lot more about this, because like there's also a process involved. One of the brief thing is we actually observe the client in authoring. Like we for us, the author is just as much a user as the end user is. So
exactly,
like, we kind of learned from how they do it and built it the way they want it to be. But I let Natalia, like there's a lot of research that went into that. So.
Yeah, and we are still learning from it. Like we realize there's a lot of branches that these just are involved. So for the learning process, yeah, it was like every time that we launch a new feature, there was a demo, and it was recorded. Like everybody asking questions. It was very overwhelming, the single demo. So what we did later on was gave them like guidelines. We use like a mirror board, so where they could look every single of the features, and we created like a manual of how to use it in a Airtable as well. So it was like a source that they could just come back later after, and if they forgot something, that was like the place they could like find the answers, I will say. But it was like a constant conversation, and luckily they were very open to learn these new tools, especially because they weren't like very, they were feeling certain pain with the old tools. Like they were reaching some constant constraints that they was not good for them to do what they would wish they could do. So right now with this new tool, the new CMS and the old resources that we were providing, that was very, like they were very receptive and open to all that we were given to them. So that was really good.
That's good to have. So you don't have resistance from, let's say, even authors that this is the way we did it. Can we just continue doing it this way? They were
Yeah, no.
open to being retrained and changing their paradigm thought process.
Yes, and even with the conversation, for example, that Fuene was mentioning about the Strappy, there was a conversation with the client to which one is the CMS that we want to go to. Like there were a couple more options, but like collaboratively, we decided that Strappy was the one to go, and they were very clear about why is the reason for this one is the best fit for the NF project.
Cool. Well, we're getting pretty close to the end here. I do have a couple more questions. Let's do a quick summary of the testing phase. How did the testing go, QA, prior to going live? Or did you guys, was that part of, because it's agile, was it constantly every week testing, or was there one final moment where you said, okay, we're going to test the whole thing and then we go live? How did that process go?
We have multiple environments. So we have development, we have QA, we have staging, we have production. At the beginning, we didn't have all of them, but we had the necessary for QA to jump in and start doing tests before launching. So there was always a QA person like testing every moment of every new feature we build. It was tested. It doesn't matter if it was a release candidate or not. With that, I mean it was close to the release because everything was part of it was
Right.
a release, but close to release or not. But we had a couple of big moments in the past when we did big releases. Right now, we are launching once a week, and that's actually part of our agile process right now. Again, it's a challenge. We are turning more into a Kanban board rather than a sprint thing because we are kind of planning the next release on specific features, but sometimes we have other features we need to like not delay, but have a larger time frame for
Right.
them. But it was always a QA person or a QA team, rather. At the beginning, it was a person. Then we switched to a QA team, basically to have multiple eyes and multiple points of views. But yeah, I think every single so the same as any agile project, we have tasks or stories or however you want to call them, little boxes on a system. We move around some columns. So every time one of them was ready to be delivered, we actually send it to a QA column, a QA team that grab them and test them, all of them. So yeah, I think QA, and just to say this, we don't just trust the QA process itself. The developers also test stuff. It's part of the acceptance criteria. Every time we are delivering something, you have to test first. And I think that contributed right now into our agile process. Right now, when we do something, every single technologist on the team test like basic cases. We have regression documentation and stuff like that. So we actually take on some of those things ourselves. So I think QA or quality is a big concern on our side. I think it has to be a big concern everywhere.
What percentage of time do you feel QA took out of the entire project?
Sometimes it feels 200%, but I would say, I was going to say like 40-50%, but sometimes it do feel like, oh my God, we are doing 200% of QA.
I think from an entire resource allocation, it's probably like 15%-ish, 20%. Yeah.
Okay. And did you guys use automated tools, manual testing, a mixture of both?
Mixture of both. There was the funny thing about the flavor. Like I think many companies probably find it really difficult to test while they're developing. And I've seen this everywhere. How the conversation is always the same. It's here's a bug. Developer says, "Well, that wasn't done yet. That wasn't part of the that wasn't part of my ticket, right?" So like something is in shambles, and then it doesn't get done later on because now you forget the second part of the ticket and all of that. And we really, for us, this process has been focused end to end. Not just is it a good developer experience, but it really is the impact there at the end of the day, and like does it feel good at the end of the day? So when we're creating these tickets, we're like they have to be done end to end, meaning back end, front end, animations, polish. Like there's no polish at the last week where we kind of create animations and all of that, right? Like when QA sees a ticket, it needs to be done. It needs to be to the point where yes, the user can now take it and play around with it. This is not done yet. This gets a lot simpler once you've launched something because then you get automatically into that cadence of that's how it needs to be. But before launching, these projects are so tricky because you have so many construction sites. And so we really focused our process on cutting down those construction sites and making testing a lot more predictable, essentially. Right.
From a launch perspective, what was the biggest challenge and what was the easiest thing?
I think one of the biggest challenges is launching in an enterprise infrastructure that has a lot of eyes involved, a lot of verticals, right? Like there's a team that does networking, there's a team that does the DNS, like it all has, the stars have to align, and like there is a day, and right, there's an end of day, 5 p.m., everyone's on a call, and we actually fumbled the first one. Like we weren't aware that like some particular team was needed to do something specific on that 5 p.m. and there were 25 people from all different groups involved. We had a launch checklist, everything was there. Like kind of we were like, yep, all of this needs to be done. And then we were like, wait, who's doing this? We were literally on the call and we had to say like, no, we're going to do this in a few days because calendars have to align too, right? Like it's a big thing to do to launch something like this with a domain and network and infrastructure and VPCs and all of that. So,
well, in that case, a question for you: was the client understanding there? Because it sounds like maybe in that case nobody was at fault. Like you guys obviously don't know who's needed internally, and maybe even the client, the point of contact, because it's such a big company, they won't know everybody that's needed to launch something. Or in that fumble, did somebody say, "Hey, you guys messed up here"? Did they point
nobody.
fingers?
Yeah. No.
So it was more of a okay.
Yeah, Nike doesn't point fingers.
Good.
But for us,
they throw a ball. Just kidding.
They throw a ball. That's right. Yeah, they kick a ball. No, honestly, like I still feel like that's on us because we did have a run of show. We felt good about it, but sometimes you have this run of show and you think something is obvious and you just skip it. You're like, yeah, we'll do that. And that was our mistake. Like we learned from that to say there's no item that's too small on a launch checklist that does not have to be played through, right? To be like, who does this? Like there was a literal item on the launch checklist that we just basically said like, yeah, we got this. This must be that team. And we made an assumption. And that's on us. Like that, I know Nike doesn't point fingers. For me, that was my responsibility at the end of the day, to make sure that doesn't happen. It felt bad, but again, the trust was there. Like everybody understood, like these mistakes happen, and we all came back with a smile a few days later and launched this experience. And That's great.
But I feel like what you had there is you can only learn by going to battle, right? Going to the war. I mean, I have a checklist for all the podcasts, and people always go, "Oh, that's a great checklist." Well, it's a war checklist. I've learned only when I missed it, I added to the checklist, right? And some things you just have to experience it, and then you go, "Okay, next time I got to make sure we cover that."
Right. I mean, the entire checklist until that point was a war checklist. That wasn't like. This wasn't out of nowhere. This was out of like all the other experiences we've launched. Where like, oh yeah, we need this. But because it was an internal experience, it was the first time we launched an internal only experience. Like there were certain strings attached, and we were like, oh, we probably need this on the launch. We thought about it. We just didn't think that the internal DNS is not the same team as the external DNS. So it's like you make certain assumptions and they might not be correct, and they have different.
Especially depends on the company size and all of that, right? Everybody has different responsibilities.
Yeah.
We're getting very, very close to the end here. I'm going to go through a couple of questions, and I'd love somebody to each do a quick answer on each event. What went well?
Having an amazing client all the way along, for sure.
Learning from or falling in love of the product we are building. I think that went amazingly well because we acquired ambition to actually have the big features and the big things live.
What went well is really like setting that mission and that vision that everybody understood and a very clear problem statement. Yeah, we spent quite a while on creating the problem statement that everybody understood up front.
So what was the challenge?
I'm going to say the complexity was a challenge. And by complexity, I don't mean like that team is really complex, but actually how that team interacts with the entire company is actually the complexity, I think.
Makes sense.
So understanding that was a long process. It's still a process. That's the piece Natalie is saying, like we're still learning from the client every single day. Every time they are like, oh yeah, we present this to a certain stakeholder or something, and it's like we learn. We are like, oh my God. So I think that has been a challenge because it's a really important team in a really big organization.
Yeah. What do you guys all feel needs to be improved on for next time?
I think there's a lot more to learn about the end user, and the problem statement that we created was very narrow, deliberately to actually focus on the experience. And I think now we're expanding on the problem statement. Now that we have a foundation, we can actually jump to the next problem. So I don't think like we would expand on the current problem statement, but I think we're going to start expanding to all of Nike. We focused on designers specifically and marketers. And I think now we're really focusing on all of Nike to inspire people at Nike to really make them feel at home. And we had this interesting approach of saying, I don't think Nike needs to even say their values out loud anymore. They can tell them through stories, which we've done for thousands of years. Like we don't need to communicate our values if we can actually tell stories that communicate those just as well. And I think that's where we're getting to, and making a lot more interactive, a lot more bespoke, and a lot more close to people, I think is going to be the big one.
And finally, what do you feel was the biggest learn?
That's a tough one because every single step of the process is a learning, and it's just really complicated to pick one. But no, I can pick one.
My biggest learning, I would say, is also learning what I wanted to do as Matter Supply. Because learning through clients is like, oh yeah, we are doing something for the client. But then when you see that you really love building that, you are like, oh, maybe that's our thing. For example, legacy archive or stuff like that. Not legacy products, but archive and all the past and stories. And maybe you are like, oh yeah, I really want to do that. I think that's a big learning I had.
I love that. That is very, most people would answer about the project, but you've learned something about yourself because of that project. So that's really cool. Mark, you were going to say something.
I was going to just say, like, really trusting the team. Like once that vision is set and the mission and you start to feel that is understood by everyone, of really trusting the team with coming up with excellent ideas and really driving them home. Like sometimes it feels like as a leader, you need to be there and make all the decisions, but you really do not, right? Like once that mission is set and everybody sees the purpose and the vision, like this takes care of itself. And the ideas that have come to fruition that everybody brought to that table make this experience that it is now, that no single person on this team would have come up with the final experience that we have, right? This was really a lot more than the sum of the parts. This was really the team itself that kind of elevated each other to where we are.
Awesome. So what's the next steps on this project?
Machine learning, VR, NFTs. Is there another buzzword, right? Blockchain, right? No, honestly, the funny thing about this is like I love all of these
Self-driving. I don't know. We're just
self-driving,
throwing buzzwords
right?
out.
Self-driving, but I feel like all the other buzzwords actually apply. Like if you think about an archive,
AI, obviously. I mean,
AI
this is a perfect
applies.
candidate for AI,
Right.
obviously.
It's actually a perfect candidate for everything. NFTs, because it's the real archive. It's the actual thing, right? It's like the game worn
Right.
jersey from Michael Jordan. Like you can NFT that. You can't
VR
like,
to experience that, and
yeah,
right.
XR. All of the things actually apply. So I'm like only saying this half jokingly, but it's definitely all the buzzwords.
Except the
Like,
self-driving part. Well, maybe you can make it a
who
maybe.
knows?
I don't know. Who knows?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. You guys have been great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys being here. It's always a pleasure speaking with all of you guys. I hope to have you back again for another project soon. Mark, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
That's through my email. It's mark@mattersupply.
There you go. Look at that. That's perfection right there. You practice enough of that.
Marcelo makes us practice that. Just so
I know,
you know.
right?
Like if you're ever on this
Exactly.
podcast, it's the right hand and you point it right there, or it's the left hand, like going right this.
Oh, look at that. I can't do the left hand. You're awesome. All right, Mark, thank you so much. How about you, Natalia? How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, same. Right hand, right? So right
Yep.
here.
There you go.
That's good.
There you go. Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And David?
I think the same through my email. So it's right here.
There you go, right there. I love that. Excellent. Yeah, we'll fix that lower third. We'll put it in the upper right hand for you. Thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. And thanks to the rest of you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Retrospective. I know I did. I always love speaking with them. They're a great team to speak with. And stay tuned for many more of these episodes coming soon. As always, go check out the site, headlesscreator.com. And if you want to get a hold of me, right there, see, there you go. Right up there is where you can get a hold of me, Marcelo at headlesscreator.com. So I will see you on the next one. Cheers, everybody.